Hello, and welcome to another virtual author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I am John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is delighted to welcome debut author Mary Liza Hartong, whose new book, Love and Hot Chicken, will soon be on the shelves in bookstores and libraries near you. Before we begin, I would like to let those tuning in know the Poison Pen does have copies of Love and Hot Chicken on order, and we would be happy to hold one for you or put one in the mail. Just give us a call or go online to the Poison Pen Bookstore. I would like to welcome Mary Liza.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. I always love finding a new author, and especially a new author who's just starting out on their literary career. And I just completely fell in love with your book, Love and Hot Chicken. But there's always a story about an author before they became published. And as a reader, I'm fascinated because sometimes that gives us clues as to where they're going. So, what can you tell us about your life prior to the publication of Love and Hot Chicken?
Well, I do feel like my upbringing definitely led to the book. I was born and raised in Nashville, and I grew up in the house that my mom grew up in, and my grandmother grew up in, and that my great grandparents bought. And so I have a real, connection to the area. And yeah, I think I had a very kind of idyllic childhood that was kind of similar to my mom's in that we would, walk down the street and play in the creek. I have two sisters, and there are tons of kids in the neighborhood, and we spent a ton of time outside. Um, and then I attended an all-girls school here, Harpeth Hall, and I went to Dartmouth College, stayed there for grad school as well. Then I went to Ireland to do a Fulbright, and then I moved to New Orleans, and then I moved back home. So I feel like I like to say I've lived in every climate except for maybe the desert. But I sort of had a roundabout journey to get home. But it's been great being back.
That's wonderful. Um, Love and Hot Chicken is your first novel, but you were writing before that. You've done poetry, I believe, and short stories and other kinds of things. What is it about writing that you decided early on? Did you know I want to be a writer, or did it just kind of gradually creep in to your life?
Oh, totally. I mean, I think starting off, my parents are both great storytellers. My mom she's from Nashville, and she's got that totally Southern vernacular and drawl, and, love to tell stories. And my parents always read to us a lot as children. I was definitely the kid who knew she wanted to be a writer very early on. I can remember one day at the swimming pool, there must have been lightning or something. And so we had to get all out of the pool. And I went and sat down at a little wrought iron table and wrote my first book when I was 6. And it was called The Dogs Who Spy. Um, I wish I still had it. I don't know where it is. But yeah, from there, I just was always writing as a kid. And I had a lot of really good teachers who helped me to, like, submit my work to magazines and go to, little writer conferences for middle schoolers. And, I just kind of kept plugging away at it and, um, trying to publish stuff in journals and magazines and just kind of hoping to get a little snowball effect going from there.
What made you decide, okay, now is the time for me to write a novel? And what was it like getting the book into publication? Was it an overnight success? Was it a long day's journey into night? What can you tell us?
Well, I started writing it like right before COVID hit.
Uh,
And it kind of started out because I was working in an office and there were three of us. And I think it's hard to be three people in any situation. There's always tension, and I was frustrated. And so I thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to write about a workplace with three people. And I'm just going to try to write 1,000 words on it every week. And, then lockdown happened and I had more time to work on it and um, and so then I wrote the first draft from about February 2020 to October 2020. And then I kind of kept building it from there. In about December 2020, I started looking for an agent. Um, and I applied for probably like 77 agents, and 10 of them wanted to read it. Three of them had some interest, and eventually I picked the one. And then it took her about a little over a year to sell it. So it just felt like a lot of different chunks of time. It's wild that it's coming out next month because it's been such a long process. And each step of the way, I'm glad I didn't know how long it would take. If I had known, I would have been like, what?
Mhm.
It's not going to come out till 2024. Um, but yeah, I think that just the biggest thing that kind of like lit the way for me was, after rejections or after setbacks of just saying, I really believe that this book matters. And I really think it's funny and I think it's going to mean something to people. And I think as an author, you just have to so at the center of everything, believe in yourself and believe that your book is worth it.
Those are valuable words to give to aspiring writers. What can you tell us about love and hot chicken? And for those that don't know what hot chicken is, can you kind of give a bit of description of that too?
Of the book or of the hot chicken itself.
Tell us about the book, and if you've never heard of hot chicken, because I'll be honest, I thought, is that the same thing as fried chicken? I wasn't exactly sure. Kind of clue us into that too.
It's kind of it started in Nashville. I believe the Prince family was kind of the originator of the hot chicken recipe. Um, and it's just really spicy. It
Uh,
kind of takes all of those southern spices and just kicks them up a huge notch. It's got kind of like an orangey red glow to it. Um, and uh, it's such a cultural touch point in Nashville. People at every menu, you've got Nashville style hot chicken, hot chicken, hot chicken, hot chicken. And I originally the book was called just Hot Chicken because I thought it was kind of a fun, double entendre, like hot as in there's a beauty pageant in it, and
mhm.
chicken kind of representing how the main character is sort of afraid to move on.
Oh,
Um, but it was later changed to Love and Hot Chicken to kind of give readers a little bit more of a
mhm.
window into what the book was about.
And tell us a little bit about your protagonist.
So PJ, our very fun protagonist, she starts off the book. She's doing her PhD at Vanderbilt for history, and she's very confident and she's gay and she has a thriving social life in Nashville. But when her daddy dies, she goes back to her small town in West Tennessee. Um, and she kind of loses a little bit of her pluck. She's worried about her mom, and she decides to stick around and work at this hot chicken shack, kind of under the guise of comforting her mom. But she had such a close relationship with her dad, she kind of doesn't know how to go back and go on without him there. So I would say she is, irreverent. She's got a sailor's mouth, but she's very earnest and, just has a lot of heart.
I think that's true. I also think one of the things that you really do beautifully is setting. It's in the South, and um, what is it about? I mean, there's books set all over the world, all over the US, but for some reason, the South seems to be such a magnet for so many writers. What is it about the South that makes you want to write?
My mom always says that the worst thing that happened to Southern writing was the invention of air conditioning. Um, she's like, before air conditioning, people had to really sit out on their porches and write. Um, I just think it's such a rich landscape. Like, I always think about this with country music, and people love to make fun of country music, but country music covers everything. It's not afraid to be silly. It's sad. It's silly. It kind of just is unembarrassed to cover a whole variety of topics. And I kind of wanted to write about the really specific and kind of rednecky, quote unquote tacky, the just like I write a lot about food. I write about like Little Debbie zebra cakes, or bunny bread. Um, and I think that I just think that there's a humor to a Southern setting, where it's always, but the characters are in on their own joke. Like if people make fun of country music, if people make fun of small towns or hillbillies or whatever, Southerners are really in on that joke. And I thought this is a great, place to set this. I wanted it to be funny. I'm like, let's just put it in a really specific little small town that's just having fun with it.
I think you do really well with that. And you're also right. Your characters embrace who they are. They're not embarrassed by um, what they do, who they're with, what their town is like. Whereas some people would be a little bit more self-conscious or worry about what others are going to think. I remember at one point in the book, you talk about PJ getting her outfit for the competition from Reba's by Dillard's or something like that. And I'm thinking, is that really an actual thing? But it sounds like it could be.
It is. Reba for It really is. It really is. And it's what you would expect. It's like the patterns, you know, uh, that's a real thing. Some of the stuff in the book, that poor copy editor tried to ask me, had to ask me about all these different things like, okay, Reba for Dillard's, is that a brand name? And I'm like, yes. And then they would say, what about Henry Hansel's toupees? I'm like, that was made up. Uh, having to go line by line of these, you know, real and fake businesses. Um,
You mentioned country music, which I think is a good analogy. And if I remember correctly, you learned something about using lyrics in a book when you were writing Love and
oh,
Hope.
I wish this was like the most heartbreaking realization that you can't just use lyrics willy-nilly because I really wanted to put the lyrics to Patsy Cline's Crazy at one point in the book, and the lines were just so perfect for what I wanted to say, and I was going to have the characters kind of sing them to each other. And my editor's like, if we want to use those lyrics, you're going to have to chase down the copyright and see who owns it and if we can have permission to put it in the book. And the same happened. I wanted to put an epigraph from Islands in the Stream. She said you need to figure out who owns that, and it just felt like a lot of work. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll take them out. But in my heart, they're still there. Um, but that's something that I would have just never known because you see that so often in books. I mean, there's books that have a quote from a something famous at every chapter,
Yeah.
and they just might be more tenacious about research than I am. Um,
Or they
but
have
I
a
just,
larger legal department behind them or something.
yeah, I like to think that Patsy Cline's estate will get a boost from hopefully people will read this book who maybe don't know about her and say, "Oh, I should really check out Patsy Cline." But you know,
Your book is humorous and heartfelt, but it also deals with some serious topics in a very graceful way, in a very deep way. I've been reading the book and writing down page numbers and things like that. But one of the things that you'd written really, to me, seemed quite profound. And I'll quote just a little bit. It's from the book. This is PJ talking. When I was little, Daddy and I would go out in the snow together. I always wanted to wear gloves, but he told me to wear mittens. Said that when your fingers are apart, there's more space for the cold to touch. When somebody dies, it's like you find all the places on your body the cold can touch, places you didn't even know existed. Wow, that's really wise, I guess is the best word to put it. But you write a lot about grief and how it's not something that you can get over in a week or a day or a month. It's different for everybody. I think in some cases, it's true. It comes in waves. Why did you really want to explore grief and how it can affect someone?
and the strange thing is that I've been really lucky to not lose anybody deeply close to me in my life. And so in some ways, I feel like someday when I do, I'm going to read my own book and
Mhm.
find comfort in it. But I think at the time when I was writing this book, I was thinking about grieving the different phases of life. It was during COVID, and I think a lot of us were kind of thinking about what do I, when this is all over, what do I want my new life to look like, or what am I letting go of? And I was kind of reaching a period where I was realizing that I wanted to move home.
Mhm.
Um, but I did have to let go of a lot of things in my old life in order to come home. I was, leaving a city and leaving a relationship. And I remember I could walk to my local library, and I had the most amazing deck. and this palm tree, and I was living in New Orleans. Um, and I could walk to this library, and I had this little cheesesteak place. And as I was kind of making the decision that I knew I wanted to leave, I'm like, oh, I'm really sad to lose this palm tree, and I'm sad to lose this library. But I just had to think, I know there will be another library. I know there's a different life for me awaiting. So I think that I was maybe moving through the grief of leaving that part of my life behind and starting the next chapter. Um, but yeah, it's strange to me now in a way that this book is so much about grief because I have been fortunate to not have to do it in the way that PJ has to do it.
Mhm.
Um,
Hmm. That's really interesting because I think you're right. It is about grief, but you can also say it's about loss, and loss doesn't have to necessarily be a person. It can be sometimes a thing or a career or something else and how you deal with that. But it's you're quite young, but you're quite wise, which is remarkable for your the book itself. Let's talk a little bit about your writing process because you've written all different kinds of things. How do you know when you start a project, this is going to be an essay, this is going to be a journal article, this is going to be a book, or poetry? And do you write, does the process, I mean, I would think if you're writing poetry, it's a little bit different, but maybe not.
I guess the primary one is I write a lot of nonfiction essays, kind of memoir type stuff, and
Okay.
then I write my fiction. Um, Anything that has to do with my family usually goes in the nonfiction pot. Like the nonfiction stuff that I write, it's short form. I would say my sweet spot is 800 to 1,000 words. And I have a publication here that I write for a lot called the Nashville Scene. And I know I'm like, if I'm feeling something short form, if I'm feeling something that's usually about my family, um, that's usually a nonfiction. But I did have an experience recently. I ended up writing a fiction and a nonfiction piece about the same topic. It was about um, one summer I was gerbil sitting for my neighbors, and I immediately lost the gerbils, and they multiplied all summer, and there were just dozens of gerbils in their house when they got back. Um, and so I started off and I wrote a fiction piece about it because I wanted to expand it. I was like, I don't want to feel like I'm making anything up. I want to really run wild with this because this is such a fun topic.
Mhm.
Then I had a chance to, a magazine asked me to write a piece about animals, a nonfiction piece. I'm like, you know what? I will go back to the gerbils, and this time I'm going to really like stick to the facts and think, I'll like narrow it down. And it was only a 500 word article. So with the narrowness, I was able to kind of get at it in a different way. But yeah, sometimes it just kind of, I feel like how much do I want to play with a topic? And if I want to play with it on a larger scale, that feels like fiction. And if I want to do something really tight, then that's nonfiction.
Hmm. It's interesting. You have, if I remember correctly, taken academic classes in writing.
Mhm.
You have a background in that. I'm not a professional writer, so you feel free to correct me, but my thought is some things can be taught, other things can't. I think writers have a voice, and that's something that's unique to them. That's not something, maybe it can be refined or honed or things like that, but you can't teach someone their voice. What can you get from the academic side of learning to write? What does that help you with, I guess, would be my question.
I think definitely it's even just reading or being in a workshop, you get more ideas of like how things could work. Like when I read a really good book, I come away like, oh, okay, they did that. I've never thought of doing that. Even just a way of phrasing something or like what they get away with.
Mhm.
Um, and I think in being in academic settings gave me just a ton of time to practice. Like I think an edge that I had was because I started writing so early, I got my worst writing out of the way earlier than a lot of people. Like if my worst writing was happening in fifth and sixth grade, people starting later, their worst writing might was maybe might eh, their worst writing could have been happening at 25. So I'm like, I just have a little bit of a head start and I've practiced more because I just started so early. Um, But yeah, I think being in it's helpful to be around really bad writers. Um, because then, or in a workshop, and you never want to be unkind. I'm a softie. I'm going
Mhm.
to be the person being like, love that one sentence was so great. Um, but I think you can learn a bit from bad writers as much as you can from good writers, because you kind of see what's not working. Like, okay, I think the biggest thing I see, and I do a lot of tutoring of kids, is just long, long sentences. I think a lot of writers are really afraid to do a short sentence.
Hmm.
And I think even just seeing a short sentence in a good piece of work is a reminder to me, like, oh, right. A punchy little sentence goes a long way.
Hmm. It's interesting. What advice would you give to aspiring writers? Because you've mentioned you've learned that the publishing process can be slow and go in fits and starts. What else have you discovered now that your book's about to be published that you wish someone had told you when you first started out?
I think just the importance of your pitch.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, you write this whole well, first of all, I would say you kind of do need to go ahead and write the book.
Mhm.
That's the hardest part. When people tell me all the time, oh, I want to write a book, and I'm like, I hate to tell you, but you do have to do it. Um, and then if you don't know what it's about, to give it to a friend, and that person will be able to pull out, oh, it's about this. Sometimes you're so close to it you can't see. Like when I went back in to do edits, my editor or my agent said, this book is a lot about PJ's relationship with her mom and the conflict there. And I had not realized that. I was like, right, I guess it is. I guess that's kind of a thing. And she's like, do more of that.
Mhm.
So I think that having somebody else who can kind of see your book and see what it's about, and being able to see for yourself, kind of pulling it together, because people are going to ask you what your book is about to explain it in one sentence so many times.
Yeah.
Like I'm working on a new project right now. And a friend was like, "What's it about?" And I was trying to describe it. And I'm like, "I don't have the pitch yet. The book isn't done yet. I
Mm.
haven't read it a million times. I haven't had a friend read it. So I don't have that sentence yet. I know that I will, but I haven't spent enough time with it to have a really confident one sentence, one paragraph. Um, but in terms of, I think, selling a book, that having that confident sentence, it goes a long way.
What is the pitch that you finally came up with for Love and Hot Chicken?
What I usually tell people, I say that it's Schitt's Creek meets the South, uh, or a modern fried green tomatoes, and that it is about a girl who goes home from her PhD program to her little town, works at a chicken shack, and is forced to participate in a beauty pageant. But none of the people who work there are very frou-frou. And so, redneck chaos ensues, which, that's part of it. That doesn't encapsulate everything, but it gets people like, huh,
Mhm.
that sounds fun.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot of layers to the book. I mean, it's about friendship in many senses. It's also about the joy of reading. And that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about because in the book, there's a series that your protagonist loves, the Raccoon King books. Where did you come up with that idea? Have you had your own experience as a reader with series that like you can't wait for the next book to come out?
I think, it's kind of based on the fake series, The Raccoon King of Lake Tomorrow. It's so silly.
Mhm.
Um, but it was sort of based on my experience as a kid. I grew up right in the right time to go to the Harry Potter, book, the day the book would come out.
Mhm.
Everybody would dress up and you'd wait until midnight and you'd get your book. And it was always just so exciting. And people would try to read it all in one day. And, um, I loved doing that as a kid. And so I kind of wanted to capture that feeling of, being obsessed with the new book. And in Love and Hot Chicken, PJ is like a little bit too old to still be reading the books. But I wanted her to be, a devoted fan, even in her mid 20s, to this, silly series.
Working in a bookstore and previous in the library, I can tell you age is no barrier to Harry Potter fans. We've seen everything from tweens to over 80. But what I loved is how you captured just how passionate you can be about books. And what are some of the other, I know you have some information on your website, but what are some of the books that have been touchstones for you as a reader?
Oh, let's see. I really loved Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood. I read that when I was living in New Orleans, and it was perfect because it was, it's kind of set in Louisiana. I'm trying to think. I mean, I loved the Harry Potter books. I was such a huge reader, as a kid, and um, I remember really enjoying the Joan Bauer books and anything Sharon Creech and Stargirl, and um, I loved the Harry Potter books. I was, had my little group of nerd friends, and I had a friend who had read them like 28 times. Like, I've only read them twice. Um, because of Winn-Dixie, I would say is a big one.
Um,
That is especially for Southern books. Especially now I'm really interested in reading Southern authors and kind of getting at who gets it right and um, just capturing uh, I wanted in my book to capture the spirit of the South, as I know it, and kind of have a hopeful, it's a little bit of a fantasy. But so is Schitt's Creek. And I like that that's instead of being like, oh, well, that's not really realistic. That's not really what it's like. And it wasn't exactly what it was like for me growing up in terms of acceptance
mhm.
um, for queer people. But I'm like, I want to make something nicer, dress for the job you want.
Yeah. And you actually brought up something I wanted to ask you about because I think sometimes, especially today, it's such an issue of contention, but how important is it for every reader to see themselves reflected in books?
I think it's so important. I really love this comedian, Cameron Esposito. Um, and they talk about, I knew being a comedian was a job, but no one ever said, you can have that job. And I feel like that about queer representation in the South in particular. Growing up, I knew that there were gay people. Um, they didn't really seem very much like me. I'm pretty frou-frou and or eccentric or artsy, and I feel like a lot of the representation I saw of queer people were, super stereotypical or, you know, and had I been able to see someone who looked more like me or dressed more like me and was, living their happy gay life, maybe I would have said earlier, like, oh, okay, I could be that. Look, that looks kind of familiar. I work at a school and I just try to be the happy queer person that the kids can talk to. I'm not trying to push anything on them, but I'm just being there. And I think the best thing I can do for them is just to be myself and happy. And I'm getting married soon.
Oh,
And
congratulations.
thank you. And the kids are very into the idea of the wedding. They want to like, go on Etsy with me and pick out a veil and do everything. And I think and I've, showed them the invitation and all of the parents' names are on it. And I want to show them there is a world where you are loved and supported and living your best life. Because I don't feel like there was a great emblem of that for me. Um, and I just want to make it easier for them.
That's wonderful. You briefly mentioned, and feel free to go into as much or as little detail as you'd like about what's next for you as an author.
So I'm working on a book right now. I wanted to do something coming of age. I've really wanted to do like a younger coming of age. So it's sort of like a book smart meets because of Winn-Dixie. Uh, it's a book. It takes place in 2010. It's about teenagers and they inadvertently become in charge of saving their crumbling church. Uh, so I've had a lot of fun kind of going back to what the feel of being a teenager in 2010 was like. And what people were wearing and kind of that in between time of when you're not 16 yet, but you're in high school and you're kind of awkward and you don't know what to do. Um, yeah, it's it's there's a lot of awkwardness and earnestness that I'm having a lot of fun with. Um, but I don't have the pitch yet. That's the thing. I'm like I'm making myself finish the book first.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm trying to, I would say it's slightly less silly than Love and Hot Chicken, but still with that, a very similar feel.
Hmm. This is kind of an unrelated question, but I discovered this and thought, wow, that's interesting. Did you really live in a closet with a slanted ceiling?
I did. When it was the semester before I started grad school, and I had a concussion, and there was somebody who was renting out this. It really, I mean, you could not stand up.
Hmm.
Uh, it was $300 a month, and I could fit in my double bed. Um, and oh gosh, it was a miserable living situation, but in my mind, I'm like, this is great. It's 300 bucks. Uh, and I'm like, why am I doing this? And I lived there for about 3 months and then I moved out. But uh, I know, I remember I was so worried to show my mom that I was living there. And she's like, now, what are we doing here? Like, I don't even know. I was concussed. It felt like a good idea at the time.
Fodder for a future book, I imagine, or something.
I know there's a coming out of the closet pun there somewhere. Uh, but
What social media are you on, if any? How can readers learn more about your books? Because you do have a lot of wonderful short pieces out there too.
yes, so my website is marylizahartong.com. I'm on Instagram as Mary Liza Hartong and Twitter as Mary Liza Hartong. Yeah, I'm post about, when I have stories and different publications and pictures of my calico, important stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
I can't believe how quickly our time has flown by. We've been very fortunate at the Poison Pen to have with us debut author Mary Liza Hartong, whose new book is Love and Hot Chicken. It will be coming to you next month in February, but it's not too early to pre-order or reserve a copy at your local library or bookstore. I'd like to thank Mary Liza for joining us. And for those of you listening in, thank you for tuning in to another author chat at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.